Up next in the broadcast, the National Assembly approves a slate of bills to cut down on government corruption and offer a safety net for poor families. However, still to be discussed later this month is cutting back lawmaker privileges. The IOC releases a new package of reforms to allow some Olympic events to be held in other cities or even other countries than the host to spread out the financial burden of putting on the world's premier sporting event. Global oil prices dropped down to levels not seen since the 2009 financial crisis. Experts predict they will go even further down next year and expect lower oil costs to fuel global economic growth. Primetime News begins now.
Welcome to Primetime News, live from Seoul. I'm Hwang Sang-hee, filling in for Kang Cheri.
And I'm Sean Lim. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. First, we begin at the National Assembly. It was the last day of this year's regular session, and lawmakers passed core bills that aim to improve the nation's welfare system and prevent corruption.
But they still have bills pending, and those will likely be tossed over to an extra session slated for later this month. Kim Young-gil starts us off.
Starting next year, families facing severe financial hardships will get more help from the government. The National Assembly passed 3 revised welfare bills Tuesday that will expand the scope of beneficiaries and put up a strong safety net for destitute families. The bills were proposed after a mother and her 2 daughters committed suicide in February in Seoul because of financial troubles. On top of the welfare bills, rival parties also passed an anti-corruption bill that will restrict public officials from getting new jobs for up to 3 years after they retire. It's intended to stem the long-standing practice of government officials taking jobs related to their area of purview after retirement, something that often leads to corporate malfeasance and negligence. Violating the law carries a possible punishment of 2 years in prison and fines of $18,000. However, the parliament has been dragging its feet on another anti-corruption bill that would set up stricter punishments for civil servants who receive bribes. It is still up for review in committee as lawmakers are at loggerheads on whether families of civil servants should be subject to punishment if implicated in a related bribery case. Lawmakers are trying to minimize any subjective interpretation of the bill. Another issue on hold is reducing lawmakers' privileges. Rival parties failed to come to an agreement on a clause that will strip lawmakers of their immunity from arrest while Parliament is in session. It's a contentious matter that has been brought up nearly every election cycle for years, but there has been no real action so far. With the regular parliamentary session over, it is likely that the bill that would strip lawmakers of certain privileges will be taken up at an extraordinary session that opens December 15th. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
The Korean public has been hit hard by recent allegations that President Park Geun-hye's former aide has been deeply involved in the running of state affairs. The controversy has led to calls for vast reforms in the president's leadership style. Choi Yoo-sun reports.
Days after vehemently dismissing a recent media report alleging her former aide has been exercising influence over state affairs, President Park Geun-hye at Tuesday's cabinet meeting further tightened her grip on the administration.
모든 언행이 사적인 것이 아니라 국민을 바라보고 행하는 그런 사명감에 충실할 수밖에 없습니다.
This was likely in response to former Culture Minister Yoo Jin-young claiming that President Park had personally ordered dismissals of personnel within his ministry, which fanned allegations that some of the president's aides were abusing their influence. The presidential office last Friday denied Yoo's claims. Despite President Park's firm stance, pollster Real Meter says support ratings for the president dropped nearly 4% days following the November 28th media report. A group of the ruling party's first and second-term lawmakers, meanwhile, urged the president to turn the situation into an opportunity to reform her style of running the country, be more transparent in appointing personnel, and communicate better with officials and the public. The prosecution's investigation into the leaked document in the media report will soon announce its findings. But what the public is more concerned about is how the president will make her administration more transparent and improve the current system of running the country. Choi Yusun, Arirang News.
President Park Geun-hye expressed hopes to share the vision behind her economic innovation plan with Brunei on this Tuesday. Meeting Sultan Haji Hassan al-Bolkiah of Brunei at her office, the president compared her 3-year plan to spur growth and create jobs with a similar Bruneian initiative, adding that she looks forward to sharing each other's wisdom and experience. Now, on that front, Korea seeks to win infrastructure projects in the Southeast Asian nation. The Sultan, in response, touted Korea's achievements, particularly in cutting-edge technology. Following their summit, the two leaders also signed deals, including one on agriculture development and cooperation.
In a move that could have big implications for the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, the International Olympic Committee has approved an action plan that will allow future Olympic Games to hold events outside the host country or city. Organizers of the Pyeongchang Games, however, say they will not be taking up the IOC's new option. Shin Se-min has more.
Thank you. Also, this is unanimously approved.
In one of the most significant shakeups in its history, the International Olympic Committee has approved a measure to allow some events to be held in other cities or even other countries to spread out the financial burden of hosting the world's premier sporting event. The IOC hopes to move, part of its package of reforms known as Olympic Agenda 2020, will encourage more countries to make bids or joint bids to hold either the Winter or Summer Games. Meeting in Monaco on Monday local time, IOC members also agreed to limit the Games to 10,500 athletes in 310 events. The IOC will also scrap its cap of 28 sports in the Games. This means popular sports like baseball, karate, and squash could make a comeback in time for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. The IOC decision could have major implications for 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Games, as the organization has suggested the organizers move the sledding sports to another country as a cost-cutting measure. The Pyeongchang Organizing Committee, however, says it has no intention of switching anything, as construction of stadiums and facilities has already begun. One option that's been suggested is splitting the event with Nagano, the host city of the 1998 Winter Games. Pyeongchang organizers say splitting the Olympics with Japan is very unlikely, given the frosty relations between the two nations over historical and territorial issues. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Reports that an oversupply of oil is likely to extend into next year has pushed global crude prices to lows not seen in 5 years. And this trend is expected to force oil prices even further down in 2015. For more on why that's good news for countries like Korea, but very bad news for others, here's our Kim Min-ji.
Global oil prices tumbled to a 5-year low Monday following projections of a steeper downward trend next year. West Texas Intermediate oil fell 4.2% to finish at just over $63 per barrel on the New York Mercantile Exchange. That's the lowest it's been since July 2009. The benchmark Brent crude also fell more than 4% to $66.19 a barrel, its lowest level since September 2009. This comes after the chief executive of Kuwait's national oil company said Brent crude prices are expected to hover around $65 per barrel for the next 6 to 7 months. Morgan Stanley also expects prices to slump for some time. Last week, it cut its average 2015 Brent base case outlook by about 30% to $70 a barrel, adding that prices could plummet to as low as $43 a barrel at some point. Global bank UBS estimates that every $10 drop in oil prices will add around 0.2 percentage points to global GDP. And those expected to benefit the most are countries that rely heavily on oil imports, such as Korea, India, Japan, Germany, and China. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Korean exporters are finding themselves in an increasingly tight spot as the depreciation of the Japanese yen is rapidly eroding their price competitiveness. With the outlook for next year looking equally bleak, some analysts are calling for Korea's central bank to cut the country's key interest rate. Kim Ji-yeon has more.
The Japanese yen is weakening twice as fast as the Korean won, raising concerns Korean exporters will continue losing their price competitiveness in global trade. Since the start of the year, the yen has tumbled 13% against the greenback, while the Korean won dropped 6%. It's believed the different pace of recovery in Japan, Korea, and the United States is being reflected in the exchange rate. Japan recorded negative growth for 2 consecutive quarters, leading up to the period ending in September. In contrast, the U.S. posted its strongest growth in more than a decade in the July to September period. The recovery of the Korean economy has been lackluster, but with the country reporting a balance of payments surplus for the 32nd consecutive month in October, the Korean won's fall against the greenback has been limited. The current exchange rate trend is forecast to continue throughout next year as well. Overseas investment banks tracked by Bloomberg forecast the Japanese currency to weaken more than 2% next year, when the Korean won is expected to weaken a mere 1% against the US dollar. Some economists expect Korean exports to drop next year if the won continues to strengthen against the Japanese yen. A report by the Hyundai Research Institute last month said Korean exports will drop by 9% if the Korean currency trades at an average of 9 won against the yen. The won is hovering around 9.2 to the yen, the highest level in 6 years and 9 months. Kim Chang-bae, a senior researcher at the Korea Economic Research Institute, says it's imperative the Bank of Korea cuts the key interest rate to keep the local currency from appreciating more against the yen. Kim Jung, Arirang News.
It's been a year since North Korea's Kaesong Tech, who was seen as one of the most important links between China and North Korea, was executed. Experts say the chill is still being felt between the two longtime allies, but Pyongyang might have found a new friend. Lee Ji-yoon explains.
It wasn't welcome news for China last year when it heard North Korea's young leader Kim Jong-un purged his uncle Kaesong Tech. Jang was well known for supporting closer ties with China, especially for Beijing-backed economic reforms. A year has passed, but China and North Korea relations are still feeling the strain from Jang's execution. The number of political exchanges between the two countries has fallen sharply. In fact, in July, the Chinese president visited South Korea first, skipping a traditional stopover in Pyongyang. As for their economic ties, the two countries were looking to develop North Korea's Nasan and Hwanggeunpyeong special economic zones. However, these projects also hit a major speed bump after Jang's death. In numbers, China's trade with North Korea dropped by about 3% in the second quarter of this year, although it still accounts for most of North Korea's foreign trade. As for North Korea's nuclear test threats, Beijing was unusually bold in its criticism. It agreed to tighten UN Security Council sanctions on the regime. But while North Korea may be losing China, it's making friends with Russia.
Despite criticism toward its nuclear program and human rights violations, North Korea is still managing to continue its diplomatic efforts with Russia.
Just last month, North Korea's top official Choi Ryong-hae was in Moscow to discuss trade and joint projects. But despite the chill in the air, experts say there's still a chance that China and North Korea could make up in the near future and be back on the same page again. Lee Ji-yoon, Arirang News.
The InterKorean Kaesong Industrial Complex will celebrate its 10th anniversary next week. But some actually argue that the full potential of the joint business facility is not being realized, mainly because of political instability. Park Ji-won tells us more.
In the 10 years since the InterKorean Kaesong industrial complex first opened, operations have grown with more than 120 companies currently operating there. However, manufacturing output has been less than steady, stunted due to political and security instability. Last year, operations at the complex were halted for more than 5 months after North Korea withdrew its tens of thousands of workers amid diplomatic tensions. That slashed both output and the industrial park's credibility. Despite the limitations, South Korea has gained a direct economic benefit worth over $3.2 billion over the past 10 years from the venture, while North Korea's total comes to $380 million. That's according to a new report from the Hyundai Research Institute. But it also talks about the unrealized potential of the complex. The industrial park currently measures about 3.3 million square kilometers in size, which is just about 5% the size laid out in the original plan.
Most operations at the complex center now focus on simple processing. The next phase should focus more on high-value added industries like heavy chemicals and tourism. The final phase would aim to become an economic hub of Northeast Asia.
The institute adds that should operations at Kaesong ever approach the final phase of the development, the venture could bring in over $68 billion worth of benefits for both Koreas. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
Sony has been hacked again, and this time it wasn't their studio in Hollywood, but the online PlayStation network. A group of hackers claim responsibility for that attack, while another hacker group is calling on Sony not to release the movie The Interview. Here's our Connie Lee with the details.
It's another hack attack on Sony. The company's online PlayStation store is up and running now, but it was down for a few hours on Monday, with this message greeting visitors. It's not you, it's the internet's fault. Hacker group Lizard Squad has claimed responsibility for the attack, posting its achievement on its Twitter feed using the PlayStation Network acronym. The latest attack comes shortly after another group of hackers paralyzed the computer systems of Sony Pictures. The Hollywood firm suffered a massive data breach, with its servers shut down and tons of confidential information leaked, including a handful of unreleased movies and the social security numbers of employees. And now the group of hackers who claimed responsibility for this is demanding that Sony not release The Interview.
You want to go kill Kim Jong-un? Totally.
An upcoming comedy film centering on North Korea. On the code-sharing website GitHub, the group of hackers, calling themselves the Guardians of Peace, said Sony could face war if the movie is not pulled. Many reports claim North Korea was behind the cyber attack on Sony Pictures as retaliation for the movie. But the communist state denies any responsibility, although it did call the hack a righteous deed. Meanwhile, Lizard Squad, the hacking group that took down PlayStation's site, has warned of more attacks this month. The FBI has also warned other companies to be on alert, as they too could be targeted. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
Hundreds of demonstrators in New York have rallied in protest against police violence in the wake of the death of an unarmed black man during an arrest in July.
With more, we turn to Paul Yee at the News Center. Paul, these fresh protests have erupted across the U.S. following the decision by a grand jury not to press charges against the officer Daniel Pantaleo.
That's right. Some 300 people fought their way past police lines near Barclays Center in Brooklyn on Monday, chanting, "I can't breathe," which were the last words uttered by 43-year-old Eric Gardner after being put in a chokehold by Pantaleo. It has become the latest venue that protesters have taken over to voice their outrage against the high-profile no indictment cases in New York, as well as the St. Louis suburb in Ferguson. NYPD says it is conducting an internal investigation into the case, while the U.S. Justice Department has launched its own probe for possible civil rights violations. And staying in the U.S., the government is on high alert against possible backlash around the world from the release of a classified Senate report on the CIA. The report is expected to reveal the extent of interrogation techniques and detention policies that were used by the agency during the Bush administration. More specifically, reports of torture on militant suspects to extract information, a practice that was banned by President Barack Obama. White House spokesman Josh Earnest said Monday that the administration had taken prudent steps to ensure security for U.S. facilities and staff worldwide, while also expressing support for the release of the document on Tuesday. And finally, shifting now to Southeast Asia, a massive storm has swept across the Philippines, leaving widespread destruction in the wake of gale force winds and torrential rains. Relief has arrived, though, as weather officials said Tuesday that Typhoon Hagupit had weakened to a tropical depression. This as the some 1.7 million people who were forced to evacuate are now returning home. The Philippine Red Cross said at least 27 people have died from the storm, most of them on the eastern coast where the typhoon made landfall Saturday evening. With wind speeds of up to 210 kilometers per hour, Hagupit is the most powerful typhoon to hit the Philippines this year. And that wraps up our look at international stories for now. I'll see you back here tomorrow night.
Hello and welcome. I'm Stephen Che with a look at sports. The KBO Golden Glove Awards were handed out on Tuesday to the 10 best players of their positions, from infielders and outfielders to the catcher, pitcher, and designated hitter. But let's start with the Lion King, Lee Seung-yup, who with his latest win at DH added a record 9th Golden Glove to his mantle. Another notable name is Nexen pitcher Andy Van Hecken, who became the first foreign player to win one in 5 years. And that brings us to the infield, where teammates Park Byung-ho at first base, MVP Seo Gun-chang at second base, and Kang Jung-ho at shortstop, along with Samsung's Park Seok-min at third, all won. Tucson catcher Yang Eui-ji rounded out the diamond. For the outfield, another Lion, Choi Young-woo, as well as NC's Na Sung-bum and Son Ha-sup of Lotte took home the top honors. On to more baseball. The KBO has enacted a wild card system starting next season to spice up the playoff race. The league's top office said it'll entail having the 4th and 5th place teams play for a first-round playoff spot. Based on the best-of-3 series, the 4th place team will go on or go in with 1-win advantage, meaning that the 5th place team will have to win 2 straight games, or the 4th place team win just 1 game to advance. Now with the live games on the night, first to the KBL, the SK Knights played host to the KCC Aegis in Seoul. And SK resists a surging KCC in the first half before the Aegis's Tyler Wilkerson lights up the third quarter. Now SK has a chance to level it up late, but KCC closes it out to earn their first back-to-back win since late October. And flying over to pro volleyball, the LIG Graders were in action against the Samsung Hwajae Blue Fangs. And the Blue Fangs blazed to a 2-1 lead before Kim Yo-han powers LIG out of the deficit in the 4th set. But Samsung Hwajae's Leo fights fire with fire, helping to bolster his team's #1 spot with the win. And finally, San Francisco Giants pitcher Madison Bumgarner was named the Sports Illustrated Sportsman of the Year for his historic performance on baseball's biggest stage. 25-year-old had a great season with 18 wins and a sub-3 ERA, but he solidified his case after throwing a record 52 2/3 innings for 4 postseason wins, including 2 in the World Series and 1 save, also in the World Series, to close out the deciding Game 7. And that's all I have for now. Your weather's up next. Have a great evening.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Michelle Park here with the latest weather forecast. It was a mild day today, and it looks like similar conditions are in store for tomorrow before rain or snow drops in nationwide by the evening. And mostly light flurries are expected to fall, but areas over in Gangwon province could get up to 5 centimeters. And with snow forecast throughout the whole week, temperatures will drop down, especially down in the morning, dipping low to -8 here in the capital. And moving over to the temperature readings for tomorrow. So we'll start off the Wednesday morning at -4 degrees before reaching up to 5 in the afternoon. Meanwhile, the southern cities such as Daegu and Busan will top higher at 7 and 11 degrees. And moving over to other regions such as Jeju-wan and peaks at 15, Dokdo hits 9, while Mangkeungang reaches 0. Well, that's all for now. Michelle Park, and back to you guys.
Thanks, Michelle. And that's primetime news for this Tuesday. Thanks for watching. I'm Sean Lim.
And I'm Hwang Sang-hee. Have a great evening. We'll see you soon.